Hey, welcome along again. One of the issues that we commonly hear talked about in schools and with young people is resilience. How do we build resilience in young people? So it's interesting that this book this month is looking at resilience. It's by Holly Catterton Allen. Get the name right. You're thinking, I've heard that name before. That's right. We looked at the book she co-wrote on intergenerational ministry a couple of months ago. This is one she wrote herself, Forming Resilient Children. So if schools and other organisations are seeing resilience is important, how does faith play into that? A great question for us to explore and a great book to be exploring. She begins by exploring what is children's spirituality. If we're going to talk about faith, we're going to talk about spirituality, probably need to define it. She's one of those people, I just jump in and do it, but she defines it. She says this: therefore, I offer the following as a working definition of children's spirituality. Children's spirituality is a quality present in every child from birth by which children seek to establish relationship with self, others, and God, as they understand God. So deals through the rest of the book thinking about those relationships with self, others, and God. How do the things we do help them to grow those relationships, particularly on a faith level? And of course, thinking about spirituality, she also wants to think about how we're forming faith, which maybe you're picking up is a bit of a theme for me. So it's interesting that she makes this definition. Spiritual formation is a lifelong, intentional, communal process of growing more aware of God's presence and becoming more like Christ through the Spirit in order to live in restored relationship with God, ourselves and others in every dimension of life. Picking up some themes there that I like to do. This is about a lifelong journey. So I read that sort of thing, I get excited. This book's going to be good because it's helping us to think about something more than just how do we get kids along to a group. And so she explores the fact that young people go through lots of different experiences. Some are really traumatic, some not so traumatic. Particularly she's writing this post-COVID. So recognizing that young people have been through COVID and lockdown, and that has had an influence on them. For some, a negative influence. For many, it's affected their lives in ways that we might not even be aware of. And so it's important, how do we help them to build resilience? Resilience is that ability that when things go wrong, when we go through tough times, we can sort of bounce back and keep going and keep growing. So in that sense, resilience becomes important for faith formation. It's that how are we helping them to grow? And so she explores that. And she explores it next in different groups. So she says, how is that helping in families? How do parents do that? And she says there are four core themes appear repeatedly in literature and research that can serve as recommendations to parents who seek to nurture their children's religious and spiritual development. 1, foster religious or spiritual conversation and discussion. 2, participate with children in religious activities or rituals. 3, model a congruent spiritual life for children. And 4, parent lovingly yet firmly. 4 wonderful things. Maybe if you've listened to some of my other stuff, there's some themes popping out there. You go, we've heard Richard talk about that before. And she unpacks each of those 4. It's not a long chapter, but a little bit on each of those. What does that look like? And in lots of the things she writes through the book, she adds stories of, and so you can sort of see it's not just a theory, but this is how this plays out in this person's life. So some interesting stories of people along the way. So she talks about parents and how if they're doing these 4 things, it will really help their kids' faith formation. She then looks at grandparents and recognizes that grandparents are important as part of the faith formation of young people. And she says they can use things like prayer, how they pray, sharing stories, being role models, sharing unhurried time, and spoiling and blessing. And she unpacks each of those again. What does that mean? And gives us some ideas, gives grandparents some ideas. How can I do this? How can I live this out? And then, the next section of the book, she turns to the church. What does it mean? How can we be more intergenerational? Yeah, that's going to come in, given her other book that we've talked about. How are we helping them to understand God's big story and our story? We've talked about that recently too, haven't we? How are we helping them to use body and spirit to embody and use their body as part of worship and part of their faith? Something church hasn't necessarily been good at. And wonder. And yes, she talks about godly play, but other parts of wonder. Those things of some of these things, how can the church start to do these things? And then she talks in the final section about some of the hard things young people go through: grief, trauma, and loss. Found it a great book of just giving some ideas of how we as church, parents, grandparents, connect with young people and help them to be growing their faith for something that is lifelong. Themes that are resonant with what I keep talking about. So found it a great book. Again, get a copy or feel free to borrow it from me. It's not long. It's a fairly easy read, but a great book. So check it out, and I'll come back with another book next month.